Thank you. Yeah, so one of the drivers for the project was being able to separate from needing to make changes to OFN tech, but being able to leverage what is there to deliver other functionality for people. And one of the ways that we wanted to look at that, it became very clear through COVID that our discovery is long neglected. Like OFN instances where they've been running for quite a long time have enormous amounts of data in them, enormous numbers of, producers and things like that. But it's not really set up for discovery of that. And there's some clunk, and the discovery was designed in, 2011 or something, and it's just never been a priority to fix it. It's always, specific things that enterprises are wanting to do, or functionality for enterprises is always what comes to the top of the list. So fixing the ability to find producers in OFN has not rated high. And also consistently over the years, people have asked us for a product search. Why can't I just find strawberries? And the logic within OFN when we started was there's no point finding strawberries if you can't get those strawberries. It's about, short food supply chains and short food distribution networks. But then as the sector has developed and over time, it's become evident that actually, there is usefulness in finding strawberries, even if you can't get them, and particularly where we're looking to scale agroecological agriculture and get into bigger buyers. When a buyer's big enough, they just need to find the strawberries and then they can contact the producer and work out what's going to happen from there. So being able to sort of separate some of the discovery function from all of the supply chain function is something we wanted to do. And the third part is around the actual, in Australia, tends to be more called regenerative agriculture. In Europe, it's more agroecology. I think the US is probably a mix of both. How do we actually display and be contributing to assurance and trustworthiness of credentials about ecological outcomes that are being met on farm? Like our purpose in coming into this was never just about small farmers. It's about, farmers that are improving ecological outcomes in their food production, and how do we start making that more visible? And again, OFN made an early kind of design decision that it's not up to us to go and check people's practices. It's not even up to us to check their assurances. We just make the information visible so someone can attach their organic certificate. And if someone really wants to check and verify if that's true, then they can go and check and verify if it's true themselves. And that's completely fine, happy with that. But another driver in Australia, it became pretty clear that this is a significant constraint in growth of the regenerative agriculture sector, particularly where that's kind of beyond organic, in that there's a lot of confusion. Like, how do we know? What do we know? There's lots of different people trying to develop lots of different standards, looking at lots of different things. And so we kind of, and there's, not a lot of coherence in the sector, a lot of different organizations working with farmers, and it's not really clear for buyers, what's the difference. And we wanted to kind of put something together that is able to say to buyers, here's a whole range of producers doing a whole range of different things. Some of them have much more solid ecological outcome verification. Some of them have just started participating in various things or started benchmarking various data. And you can kind of see that on a spectrum, and then once we can start to see all of that, it is also helpful for producers to see what other farmers are doing, and we can start to learn more about which processes are actually working for farmers in terms of communicating their ecological output. So I will now share my screen. I just got a couple of little slides. Let's go with this one. Yeah, I just got a couple of little slides to organize thoughts. So this is the project. We've been going for about a year, not much more than a year. Actually, yeah, less than a year at this point. And the first thing that we did was we got together this working group of lots of different organizations in Australia working on regenerative agriculture, working with regenerative farmers, and started curating what are all of the different kind of information sources and resources and systems that people are using to verify farm outcomes. And we also looked at market sizing, trying to work out who priority customers that we might be working with were. So yeah, we basically out of that established that in Australia, the markets are pretty immature and confused. Like where in the US, for example, there seems to be some pretty strong signals about regenerative agriculture purchasing in supply chains. In Australia, even some of those companies, those same companies, are not really, it's not really on the cards. But then we do have a lot of small to medium scale, strongly values aligned wholesale buyers, but then they tend to be still quite happy to have their personal relationships. So they're still, they don't need a whole lot of assurance through other systems. So there's still this big gap in the middle about what do we need to make it easier for more buyers who are not as strongly values aligned to start sourcing product that's slightly better than conventional or, you know, on the path. So we did all of that initial research work, and then we worked with the buyers and partners to work on design of what are we trying to do. And then there was a big chunk of work around integrating Open Food Network platform and data, building API endpoints and stuff, which I'll talk more to. And where we're at the moment is crunch point around aiming to launch now the 1st of early April. So this is just our, purpose statement. What we want to do is showcase producers to make the network and sector visible, providing quality assurance through our partnerships, and to be leveraging existing OFN technical infrastructure along with open standards to start kind of, I guess those are the words, operationalize and showcase data on interoperability. So kind of planting the idea for people of what does it look like if you don't have to enter your data 3 times in 3 different places, but that we're actually able to connect that up and put it together quickly in different forums in different situations. So this is aiming to be a showcase of, you know, we've got data and we put it together in this form, but a lot of that data could also just be pushed through. Anyway, I'll talk more about that. Developing shared digital infrastructure from which we will then do buyer experiments and work closely with buyers around how to engage them with this. That beep was just someone coming into the meeting, I think.
Sorry, that's me, Amber. I apologize for being late. Oh, my son is homesick and I just completely lost track of the time. So
That's okay. If you had been on time, you would have seen me wrestling my children out of the room. So, you know.
so you can commiserate.
I won't go into this in detail. Just as part of this project, we did a pretty thorough, like in terms of building these relationships with partners in the sector and wanting to help move people towards, you know, how do we streamline and integrate data so that we're reducing the workload for producers and managing across multiple systems. And in order to do this, it was kind of like, all right, we need to do a full examination of actually where we're at and our terms of service, you know, in light of everything that's happened in the sort of, you know, obviously we've done minor upgrades to our terms of service in the decade or so that we've existed, but really to review it in light of data sovereignty, what's happening with data, how do we actually communicate things to producers and improve all of our practices. So we went through a thing that's just been developed in Australia by the National Farmers Federation, which is a farm data code. And we went through a full full audit process around that, around how do we manage and communicate what we're doing with producers. And we also engaged Terry Janke and company to work through what does it mean, best practice around Indigenous data sovereignty, which is a, you know, particularly big issue around being really careful about what we're doing with data that could be being used and exploited around Indigenous knowledge, etc. So we've worked through all of that and updated our terms of service, which will be informing the terms of service then for the portal. In terms of eligibility to go on this regenerative agriculture discovery platform, this has been a process of, you know, working with all of these partners to agree, you know, we're trying to overcome greenwashing and set a sector-wide, you know, line in the sand about what are we comfortable to call regenerative, even though that's obviously a very broad, you know, church. And so what we've come up with is a 3-pronged thing. So basically there are certifications like organic certifications that are biodynamic certifications that are well known and accepted, and that's fine. We also accept that there are assurance partners. So there are some organizations that are working very closely with producers, know them well, and are trusted to say, look, if you say that this producer is regenerating their ecosystems, then we, the rest of the sector, trust that that's true. And then we also basically put in a thing around supporting evidence that is a more bottom-up for producers to identify and be able to add any things, resources, soil tests, bird surveys, whatever that they might have, so that we're starting to get a picture of what do people know and what kind of practices can they use to be assessing their farm scale, natural capital accounts, I guess. Like there's a lot of work. Anyway, I won't get into all of the stuff around this. If anyone wants longer conversations about regenerative and ecological outcome measuring systems, we can do that another day. So basically, we've built this process that enables the producer who's signing up to be adding these different things. And then if they select our assurance partners, that is checked with an assurance partner. So basically, there's a kind of assessment process to get on. Right, I'll talk through tech because that's probably what most of you want to know. This is what it's going to look like. It sort of starts to look like, and the guts of what the website itself is a WordPress website, so that open source, and we've got skills within our teams already around content management and all of that kind of stuff. And then the directory functions are built with solid components. We're working with Startin'blox in France, who some of you might know about or have heard about, who are kind of leading a lot of this interoperability Web3 space. And so basically the idea here is that we should be able to build, a front end that is talking to APIs to bring the data into this website, but it doesn't have a big, database and everything itself. So there's been a lot of learning in working out how to do this and what our tech stacks actually enable us to do and what they don't. But the upshot is that these components, these solid components, web components that will be sitting here in this website, we haven't quite got there for this demo, but within a week or so, there's a solid component with an API that calls an API endpoint that could be pulling data from lots of different places to build directories for different purposes with, all the stuff at the top half of this screen here is just WordPress. This is just us building the thing we want. And then these components are pulling a series of data. So this could be a totally different website, but I think the Canadians are looking at one around food justice enterprises or something. So I'll talk a bit more about that. Yeah, so the stuff that's quite specific to this project, and we don't yet know how easy it's going to be to adjust these components, but we, in the discussions initially, was believed or projected to be quite straightforward once we have these components to change what the actual filters are and that kind of thing. But yeah, so these are the filters that we'll be using for this website, is around being able to identify First Nations led, what ecological outcomes information is attached to these producers, their certifications, produce types, etc. So the stack is not as straightforward as we would like it to be, but it's where we've got to with it within a 1-year project. So basically, if we start at the bottom, some of the changes that we made at OFN, which I'll show you in a second, we didn't do anything with the group management UX actually, but we have changed a little bit around what you can do on the API to control groups and which enterprises are in which groups. We're using the concept of OFN groups, which is a group of enterprises in relation to the assurance partners, so that basically a partner has a series of enterprises connected to that partner, which we use outside OFN, but is also then able to be displayed in OFN as an OFN group. We've made some initial consent management stuff in Open Food Network. So I'll show you that in a second, but basically a producer can turn on in Open Food Network that they want to share their information to the Discover Regenerative portal. And then that links in to series of tools that at the moment are built in Airtable and mini extensions, just for speed and ability for non-developers to play with them. I'll show you that in a second. That's integrated, so that's where they can add all of their assurance information that we didn't want to be stored in OFN. We don't need that to be in OFN databases. That's a separate thing. Yeah, so there's integrations. We've built out the DFC endpoints on OFN. I think it's safe to assume that everyone knows what DFC is. Does anyone want to just flag if I need to explain that? No. Okay. Pull me up if I'm glossing over anything that you need me to explain properly. But yeah, basically this is these agreed standards for interoperable endpoints. And so we've now got OFN DFC compatible endpoints for groups, enterprises, and products. And we use resources in this project to kind of build them out a bit. So now images can go in and out, and all of the fields that we needed around that. So then what we do, there's a line of it's not yet, we can't yet send DFC endpoints directly to solid components. So there's manipulation that has to happen in that space. Some of it's about authentication. There's stuff that gets beyond me and goes into developers talking about things. But the upshot is that for this project, we had two things that meant that we couldn't send these DFC endpoints directly into the SIB web component. So basically we've got information from OFN via DFC down here, and we've got these Startin'blox web components up here, and we need to do some data manipulation to turn what we can get from OFN into what we need to give to those components. And, there's some things in that are about remaining incompatibilities and work that needs to be done to make DFC directly solid compatible. And some of it is all of this assurance information that we're gathering, particularly for this project, that is not in OFN, that is not within the DFC standard at the moment, but is necessary for us in what we're doing in this website. So we're basically taking OFN information via DFC, collecting a whole lot of other information about the regenerative assurance, putting it together into solid compatible API endpoints that we then pass to Startin'blox. So we're doing all of that with N8N, which is basically providing our API. So we're sending information into N8N from DFC, doing stuff with it, adding some other data, and putting it out into solid compatible endpoints. Are people following that? Just ask questions if you need to at any point.
I was wondering,
Yep.
with the DFC data, is that where how is that being hosted?
How is the DFC data being hosted? The DFC is just a format. It's just an API. It's just an agreed format for endpoints. So
Okay.
it's just an endpoint that you take out of OFN, and then you're doing whatever you want with the data, but it's taken out according to the DFC standards. So that is the kind of agreed, all right, well, if we provide products in this way, what we're aiming to do is have that be a widely accepted way to take and work with products, so then it becomes easier for feeding them in and out of other places.
Okay, so it's not a data instance so much as it is
No,
some
it's
sort
a
of incompatibility between the
Yeah.
ontology and the
Yeah,
Startin'blox.
it's basically, so we've got OFN and we've got products in a form that we developed quite a long
Mhm.
time ago, which we're actually busily refactoring to enable us to do a whole lot of other stuff. But the DFC is a layer that's been developed by this project led out of France. That's like, what's the actual ontology for what we're trying to do in short food supply chains, and can we agree on how we will present data or present these concepts so that it is easier for us to be compatible across different platforms, food supply chain platforms, etc.
Thank you.
So yeah, so as part of this project, we've kind of said, all right, we want the way we get information out of OFN to be compatible with DFC. So that, then if we're building things that are compatible between DFC and the Startin'blox web components, then anyone else who's brings their information out of their platform in DFC compatible format would be able to use those same Startin'blox web components, for example. Kevin, your hands up?
Yeah, so would it be correct to say that you're essentially implementing the DFC standard
Yes.
so that if someone's familiar with the standard programmatically or otherwise,
Yep.
they can hit your endpoint and
Yes.
you pass, I assume, JSON in the expected formats
Thing is
that it can.
JSON LD, so it makes
Okay.
things more complicated, but I'm told there's good reasons why they want to do
Okay.
it that way.
So if I understand correctly, DFC is not like data isn't being passed to DFC. That's just the agreed upon language, the contract.
Yeah. And the kind of the projects in France where they've sort of, pioneered this stuff, they have built a prototype that is bringing products from multiple paddock to plate platforms. But that prototype is just an example of implementation of the DFC standard. And so we've now got another one where OFN is spitting it out in that format, which means that anyone else trying to do anything using the DFC standard, we can easily be just providing data to that without having to do any more work. That makes sense. Let me try and show some things. Yeah, just get it out of that. I'm still screen sharing. Let me just stop and share a different window. Just 1 second. Okay. So this is now, sitting within our WordPress about OFN website. Well, it'll have its own links and stuff once it's released. So yeah, that's kind of WordPress. And this is at the moment just a mock-up of, what this is going to look like. Within OFN, we've implemented this. So within my settings, some of you will be very familiar with this, some might not have seen it before, but within enterprise settings, we've now got a connected apps section with this Discover Regenerative. This is my farm, so it's already, I would come in, I would click a button to say I want to do it, and then it loads up the form because I've already done it. And it actually, anyway, more detail, but then I go to manage my listing. So this is where the supplementary information relating to my assurances happens. And this is actually clicking us out to mini extensions, which is an Airtable kind of front. And we've just put in an application for extension funding, but I'm acutely aware of reliance on Airtable and mini extensions as proprietary tools. We did look at other options and we're kind of like, for the speed that we needed to move, like this lets us play and adjust with people who are not developers. But if we get the funding, the next tranche, looking at whether we can swap these out for something else now that we know what information we need once we've, actually got people through it. But anyway, so this goes to this mini extensions form, which is pulling my information from Open Food Network. So this is pre-filled or from my Open Food Network profile. If I have changed information in Open Food Network and it's not showing here, I can click this refresh button, which goes and does things in N8N and brings my updated data in here. So that's all OFN, OFN, OFN. There's a couple of additional fields that are not in OFN that are added in here. And then this is where I do my assurance information. So if I'm adding, yes, I'm working with whichever organization, select a partner. We've got a couple in there. So this is all part of this. Cancel. Yes, I am sure. Add my certifications. We're in the middle of automating a system where this is actually going to cross-check and verify with organic certifiers, get updated information on whether that is a valid certification or not. active regenerative practices. This list has been agreed with other players in the sector so that we're trying to get a least agreed list of what that is. And then people can add their own evidence of, studies they've been involved in or soil tests or whatever it might be. So seeing what they come up with. And again, in that next tranche of the project, we're looking at, can we actually build support services to support producers to find and curate what that information is. Then this next bit is around kind of contact details. We didn't get as far in this project. We wanted to be bringing in order cycle endpoints so that, when you're on the producers page, you can see their open order cycles on OFN or whether in hubs and stuff. We didn't get that far. So we've just got it pretty, for your wholesale sales. If you've got online places you can go and buy from, if you're buying from households. There's a whole thing that I won't go into, work that's been done around product categories as part of this. Actually, I should add that to the list. As part of this, we have completed the thing within OFN that enables an instance manager to map their local categories, which are different on every OFN instance, to the DFC product categories. So that is now something that can be done at an instance level to say, all right, I want this one to go to this one, etc. So we're trying to work towards, coherence in product categories, which means that we can pass data back and forward. And then this comes down here. This is loading my products out of OFN. And then I can choose up to 9 to be displayed in this portal. So yeah, this is the same as that other information. That's basically saying, if you're not seeing your updated changes, hit this button, we'll get your latest information from OFN. So it's not two-way. I can't edit my products here and push that back to OFN. It's about, this is a layer at which we're controlling data that's going to be displayed on this different platform. And again, in the, there's this alignment, if we get the funding in the second project, within OFN, we're just kind of beta testing the release of our new products interface. We're making some pretty significant changes under the hood and on top of the hood in OFN around our product management, which is going to open up a whole lot of things around being able to add labels and tags to products and manage different lists of products in different ways. So what I would really like to get to is that you're actually managing within your product list which products are shared externally with which services. So that's a kind of direction that these things would come together. So at the moment within OFN, you can only say, I'm happy to share my profile and products information with this platform, which is then sending information to this, and then they're doing a selection externally of which ones to display. Ultimately, it would be better if within OFN, they can say, I want to share these 10 products to Discover Regenerative, and then that's just the information that we get off the API rather than this manipulation in the middle. Yes, Jamie?
So this is what a producer or farmer would see. How visible is Open Food Network to others who would see this data? Like, do they know that it's coming from Open Food Network, or is there any kind of interplay from that type of
So
user?
when someone comes to the Discover Regenerative website,
right? Yeah.
Good question. At the moment, we had discussions with the working group around branding and trying to, because this is a group of different organizations, and we didn't want to get bogged down in trying to develop a new coalition, a new organization, a new brand or whatever. So we've gone with basically it's kind of a little bit OFN looking, but it's not OFN. It's a separate thing, and just keeping it, simple, but hopefully not making the mistake of original OFN of then making it completely ugly in the attempt to be sort of in the background. But mind you, in 10 years, we'll all look at this and go, oh my God, it's so ugly. What were they thinking? So yeah, it's not really explicit. Down here, yeah, it's a good question. Open to feedback about whether we should be being more explicit about that somewhere. It's this kind of balance of trying to facilitate an alliance of people kind of keeping in the background, but also not being misleading about what's going on. And I guess the
I would-
other thing is that ultimately, ultimately where we would like to go with this is that all of the data being displayed in Discover Regenerative doesn't come from OFN. That you could just as easily be pulling data from someone else's API that's providing it in with the DFC enterprise and product format. But obviously there's this big assurance piece that currently is not in the DFC, is not a standardized data, but that's kind of a question of whether it would become, and then, that this website or other websites are pulling any DFC compatible information, not just from OFN. So yeah, lots of questions about how it all kind of evolves. Kevin?
Well, Jamie, you have something else there?
Oh, well, I just wondered too if users of the Discover Regenerative, like, are they able to like follow through like on an action or transaction?
Yeah, okay.
Because that would seem like a good thing for everybody if they were able to then move back to Open Food Network or wherever they need to make purchase.
Yeah, so if I were to come in here and then I go on, I'll show you different things in a minute, but I come in and look at this. This is just a mock-up at the moment, basically. Come to this farm page. So then this is how this information is then being displayed. So then it's got the products displayed here like this, but then I can go and buy from their website, or I can go and buy from OFN or whatever they've put in as their like wholesale stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like we're not trying to do e-commerce within this at the moment. It's a discovery front end, but at the same time, if their shop's on OFN, that's where we want to send them. And that's the kind of thing that I mentioned before that we didn't get within this project, but where I would like to see it going is that this has actually got our OFN auto cycles, like we're using the DFC, agreement on what is it, I think they're calling it an offer or a sales session. So how we put information in there that could be like, okay, and you can actually buy it and the shop's actually open now, kind of thing. Yeah, and so that's where this is example one that's been filled out, and this is what the supporting evidence would come to look like. So these become the filters, show me particular certifications or show me who's got information about biodiversity, carbon accounting, etc. And we also included, things around participation. So it's like they may not have a whole lot of data, soil monitoring data or whatever, but that they have participated in, they've got a holistic grazing certificate and they've done this and they've been asked to speak at 6 different conferences, and that's actually sort of telling you something about what they're doing. It is a form of information. I can see 2 hands from Amber and Kevin. I don't know which was first.
Definitely Kevin.
Thanks. I'm just, so I've got a question about the vision here. Most of the conversations we've had around this are like specific cooperatives and their preference is to be able to white label, like and display the practices and the shop front for each of their members. But I could also see a play where this is kind of a generic marketplace across any number of cooperatives, any number of producers, any number of countries. Do you have an idea of the scope that you have in mind for this?
I'm going to make it a bit of an OFN philosophical response to that, in that I think that one of the things that we're quite good at is kind of exploring into space in a way that gives other people room to run with things. And I feel like that's been a bit of a design principle here. It was almost like I was sitting in one of the reference committee meetings where I had a kind of, it's going to be super easy for these web components to just have a different API call on them with which group you're looking at, and then you just plug them into each of those assurance partners or project partner websites. So it'd be the same thing. It's really just around how we control the API calls you know, how we set up. And at the moment we've got like super flexibility because we're doing it in Airtable and N8N, right? So we can just create some different views in Airtable to segment a bunch of data that's like, okay, we want, you know, these people, we're giving you an endpoint, go whack that component in your website and you're going to get that particular set of producers, set of products, etc. So we're pretty, we're pretty curious about where things go. And it is, you know, it is obviously that discussion around, you know, the age-old discussion about business models, which we're horrific at doing, because it's kind of like, yeah, we could, you know, we could charge people for, anyway, we haven't really got into that yet. You know, do we want to restrict this, or do we want to open this up? And you know, part of the reason for the, you know, the selection, the tech stack selection, working with Startin'blox and things like that, is these components are open source. People will be able to adapt them, change the filters on them. They create, you know, I guess we've sort of modeled a way, and we'll make that all available to people. Like, you want to build Startin'blox compatible API endpoints in N8N, you know, that's all open source. I mean, we can probably not going to give people access to change all of our workflows in N8N. I can just show you, like, this is the N8N workflow that's doing, you know, it's doing all the magic. It's getting data from here, doing the thing, got a webhook that's getting a mini extensions thing that pops that in OFN. It's, you know, there's a lot of the magic that's happening in here. And over time, you would want to simplify, so that more of this is just being done with compatible endpoints and not having to do this transformation in the middle. But, you know, in the interim, actually, you know, we could clone this workflow, and Canada can sit here and swap the, you know, we can clone the Airtable, we can clone this workflow, and then people can sit and fiddle them to turn them into what they want to. So yeah, I'd be curious to see where people take it, I guess. And it's totally in my mind, how do we simplify it? You know, because there's still a lot, you know, there's still a lot of fiddling that needs to happen, but then, you know, the freedom to fiddle is probably the only reason we've been able to get this far in a year, because of, you know, you've got the designer sitting there, or, you know, a customer service person sitting there chatting to a producer on the phone, being like, oh, okay, hang on, I'll change the way this field works, kind of thing. Amber?
Yeah, I just had a question back when you were showing us the demo screens. You had said, it had said that the producer could pick up to 9 products to feature. And I was just curious why you guys limited it to 9.
So you've got a nice square panel. It's purely a display thing. And yeah, and if you have 20, then it's going to be forever till you get down to the other stuff. And it's basically just like, this is about discovery, right? It's about trying to get people to contact producers and to get them engaging with, or even exploring, being aware of the range of ecological things that are going on. So it's that kind of, yeah, it's the mix. We didn't want the page to be, you know,
Okay.
I might just quickly show you though, Francisco, I see you there. Let me just show you. So this is not yet integrated within the WordPress. Like, this is just got this week, but this is actually the Startin'blox components, and there's still things, you know, kind of getting wired up in the background, but you know, this is the grunt of it. Like, I don't even know if there's anyone with flowers, etc. So that's the kind of producer search thing happening here. And then this bit excites me, and probably will excite other people in OFN who've been asked for this a bazillion times. But yeah, so this will be the product search across all of the producers are on it, with those same kind of filters around, okay, I want to see products that are coming from a farm that's got biodiversity measures or biodiversity outcomes, or I want to see figs where they've got soil carbon outcomes or something.
Just
So
wonder for like producers who have a lot of different types, it'll probably just force them to create products in OFN to specifically showcase the variety of things they have. So instead of having a lamb chop and a lamb shank, they're going to go in and say, I have lamb.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that way I can display just lamb and have
Yeah.
room for the other things.
Yeah, quite possibly. And I mean, again, it's like if somebody's adapting a version of this somewhere else, like our focus is how do we get into bigger B2B buyers? How are we lifting the scale of demand for these producers? So it's like, it's probably not down to exactly which type of cheese you've got. It's like, trying to get that connection and then be discussing. But, I think all of that stuff around, the number of products could be adapted. If someone's trying to do something different and they want to have all 600 products, then they're probably going to design what it looks like differently because you'll be managing that differently.
Right.
Francisco?
Thank you. I just wanted to know, maybe you saw you say this before. Uh, uh, the farmer put the information in the platform, and who is control that this information is real, and how do you measure, for example, the biodiversity? There is a standard that is writing that the farmer needs to follow.
Yeah. Okay. 2 questions. Who's controlling that the data is real? This is OFN, OFN 101 for 12 years or something now. It's kind of like in our terms of service is like, don't put bullshit on the platform. And if someone tells us that what is there is a lie, we reserve the right to take it off. And as far as I know, certainly in Australia, it's never happened. And if it does happen and we find out about it, we remove it. But it's that kind of, what's the benefit of putting something in terms of like the product itself that's false, particularly in this case, because somebody's going to call the farmer and say, right, I want to buy a whole lot of this stuff. And if they don't have it, or, it's not, I don't know. I feel like it's something that we could put a lot of effort into, but so far it hasn't presented as a problem. Until it presents as a problem, then we would put effort into it. And around the ecological stuff, yeah, that's exactly the problem, right? There is no this is a problem that the whole world is wrestling with in 60 million different ways of how do we standardize what we know about ecological outcome. We did lots of work, we did quite a lot of research and consulting stuff around this kind of thing in Australia. And yeah, we did a lot of mapping about 3 or 4 years ago around natural capital accounting systems and how we can standardize all of these things. And there's certainly work happening in that direction. But the current best practice in Australia around that is it costs about $15,000 per farm to do an assessment of your ecological assets and your biodiversity and all of the things in the standard way. And that's simply not accessible to farmers, and particularly not small farmers. And, that's part of the reason why a lot of small farmers don't even have organic certifications in Australia, is because of the cost of them. So what we're trying to do within this is say this is a pretty immature and confusing space, and the confusion around it is acting as quite an impediment for farmers who probably do have quite good ecological outcomes. But I know myself as a nerdy farmer, I've looked at all of these systems trying to work out what we should do on our farm and just kind of gone, too hard. And probably some of this project is a little bit driven by me being like, well, I've been involved in this research project over here, got these soil tests, we're doing this thing, got 20 years of bird survey data. Let's be able to talk about what we have. And then as OFN and as the community and all of the sector partners that are working on this, we start to actually be able to see, well, what is it the farmers have got? We can see both the absolute best practice, expensive, full ecological outcome verification with 2 years of improvement data. Like we can see those ones, they're the gold standard, awesome. And we can sit them alongside, okay, here's someone who hasn't done that, or they've only done their first benchmark. They've only taken the first step of assessing what they have, It doesn't tell us anything about whether they bought an awesome farm that they're now degrading or they bought a terrible farm that they're now improving. Can't see that from a benchmark, but we can at least see that they are on a path to transparency because they've done the benchmark, and that's something other than someone who's not even monitoring it. So it is kind of basically that's the, I guess, the underpinning of the approach is how do we try and bring transparency and visibility to the whole space and not get paralyzed in how do we get everyone to agree to a standard before we can have a conversation about what outcomes people are achieving. So it's a bit of a, you know, I kind of laughed the other day. I don't know how many other nerdy people are here. I mean, nerdy in different ways. It's kind of like a grounded theory approach to ecological outcomes where you're kind of trying to pull it out of what is everybody doing rather than coming from a theoretical top down. Anyway, sorry, a bit nerdy. Okay, Nick and Greg.
Thanks, Kirsten. So yeah, first of all, massive thank you to you and everyone who's worked on this. This is incredible, and I'm really excited about bringing this to Europe. And this is more of a sort of something to raise with my OFN colleagues on this call rather than a question. Just I'm really interested in how we can apply this to some of the public procurement work that we're looking at and talking to hospitals and schools and public sector buyers. And a lot of the questions they're raising is about, you know, where's this product from? How's it certified? How does it fit in with other stuff? So yeah, not something to get into in this call, but let's have a conversation about adding this to the public procurement work. And just before I sign off, there's a question from Jamie in the chat that you might want to pick up as well, Kirsten. But brilliant. Thank you so much.
Greg, do you want to go first while I'm just checking the...
I was just being smart aleck, so don't worry.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I love the approach. I think it's the best that I've heard so far. I mean, I'll shorten it to like transparency, then comparability, then standards in that order. And I think that's like spot on right. And people try to go the other way, including us, and it's painful. So yeah, I love it. I was like bringing kids home, so I did my best. So I have maybe some dumb questions, but so the system that you've built, is it distributed? Like if somebody wanted to set this up and have another instance, is that the intent, or is it all go to this instance? What's the intent on that?
Yeah, I think I gabbled on about this a little bit, Greg, so it may be worth going back in the recording, but in a nutshell, there's some clunkiness in the stack that we've put together around it in terms of getting it out quickly, but certainly that's the intent, and the big pieces are all open source. So the web components, like the actual directory display things, are open source, and to be available, they will need to be messed with if people don't want this approach to assurance. Right. But then from hearing you say, you know, from an informed, having had a crack, that you like this approach to assurance, that kind of gives me some sense of, okay, cool. Well, you know, if we could actually build momentum around that, then that was sort of in my head, you know, can we get something that's like an ontology of how we handle assurance? Because then that could become part of the standard, and rather than us messing with it all in Airtable and N8N to push it together, we end up with actually agreed interoperability standards around how we're handling that assurance information. And then we would build the API endpoints, you know, into DFC or however we might do it, which would make it easier to adapt. I don't know if you're on the call, you know, that this is the stuff that's happening in N8N to pull the pieces together into a format that goes to those components. And, you know, we'll be happy to share these workflows with people who want to, you know, we'll clone these workflows and people can fiddle with them. And the same thing like with the Airtables, we just have to work out, you know, being careful with data and things like that. But we're happy to, you know, have people run with and play with adapting what we're doing. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to look more into like that. I've never seen N8N, and that's super cool. And also just have a lot of questions about the Airtable base and things, but not enough for 2 minutes. So yeah, I'd love to follow up with someone.
I think you're the guy, you're the survey stack guy, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. because I mean, I think that so
And so much more.
Sorry, and so much more, I'm sure. Sorry, it was just you mentioned in your intro, yeah. Yeah, because that's kind of sitting in my head, like, could we be swapping out a lot of this, at least the mini extensions bit, possibly survey stack. But we did have a look at, open source Airtable alternatives, and none of them are anywhere near, just in terms of what you can do quickly in experimenting with your data and stuff. But so N8N, this has been a thing with OFN over the last, I think, probably 2 years, of swapping out kind of Zapier, Integromat, make, the kind of proprietary workflow connection things with N8N, which is an open source one. So we're running our own N8N server so that
So
OFN
cool.
instances around the world, can easily share workflows and clone them and do other things with them.
So, yeah, it's very cool.
Kevin?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I love N8N. I was going to ask earlier what it was. And then when you brought this up, I was like, oh, it's a Zapier cloud. And I love to hear that it's an open source alternative there. I see a lot of value, especially if you can make this into a kind of a turnkey solution where folks like Lightfarm and FarmOS and OFN essentially build our own component, or we pay Startin'blox to build a component, and we just, we say, this is what this thing does, right? It's going to pull these practices from the farms, and it's going to push it in this JSON, right? That makes the barrier to entry really low for partners like us, right? It makes it very easy to get involved in this ecosystem, whereas we're like coming at this from a slightly different angle. And the idea of having to like generate a document or a web page that talks about farm practices feels a little bit more daunting. But if we can generate, we can write a component that pulls from Lightfarm in like a permission way that we define in Lightfarm, that becomes really attractive. Smaller bite, and also, amplifies the number of folks that can see that.
I was going to I'll add to that too. I was going to make the same comment, but also, imagine if there's inventory sitting in Lightfarm or FarmOS and you wanted to represent it in the system. I mean, that would be amazing. And actually, we're doing very similar things to what you are doing, working on with products, in terms of having a standard transfer format with the standard sort of common farm format on the farm end, which again would facilitate to make it easier for farm management systems or others storing farm management data to make a claim, whatever that claim is, whether it be a supply chain claim or a model-based run, or a claim about whatever. So yeah, there's overlaps there.
Yeah, cool. I think I was just gonna, Kevin, I think there's something, even about like the practices, it's like the work, even just, I guess, us kind of talking, and again, it's this bottom up thing, which I think is kind of working in DFC a bit now, like that, we've got this list of practices that we basically took from a partner in Australia who's doing something similar, and they developed, it's like, but can we be evolving this list of practices so that we're kind of, on the same page? Or is it a little bit similar to like the thing that we had to do in OFN for product categories, that like each country or system, there's just some kind of mapping thing that says, that we don't all have to agree universally the same things, but we get better and better at our mapping tools for particular contexts. So it's like, cool, America's got these extra things and they use Zs in funny places where there should be S's and, stuff like that. And we don't all have to agree on the spelling, but this is pretty much these three equal this one for my one, or whatever. So yeah, and I think some of that is just kind of feeling our way and not getting lost in, analysis paralysis around how do we get everyone to the same agreed list of practices, but just kind of keep moving.
And I mean, if these components are hosted on GitHub, the cost to modify it is so small, right? Like if we have something, some logic that says this farm has at least one riparian buffer zone, and that
Yeah.
translates to this practice on, you know, this marketplace, then someone else takes that code, they fork it, and they say, well, no, in our version it has to be something else, right?
Yeah.
It's all out there. The standard can evolve over time until we actually
Yeah.
have, you know, a standard everyone agrees on.
Yeah, that's
100%.
right. And I think I get a bit lost in all of these things where everything is. But yeah, we could pick up some of these other conversations with Michael and Gareth as well about, you know, where all the DFC ontology stuff is. I think it's all on GitHub. And then the stuff that Startin'blox is doing is on GitLab. I think these components are either sitting on GitLab already. It's not coming up in my browser, so I'd have to go and find it. But yeah, it should be kind of all there for people to play with. And then I guess the question is, and you know, maybe I hand over to David and others, like what's the best way to be collaborating on these conversations? And I think that, you know, probably most of you are somewhere on OFN Slack. Like there's an open channel which is called SIB something, Startin'blox something, which is where these discussions are kind of happening at the moment. SIB OFN Discovery. You know, maybe that's a reasonable place to start with at the moment. Like that's where the activity is around actually what's building, if you want to be following that, or maybe it will end up somewhere else. And I know there's the open team process that probably lots of people are involved in, which is talking about the consent management. Anyway, hi Kevin, welcome to the channel. All right, we've sort of gone a bit over time, which is probably fine. I do need to make some lunch and things. Are there other questions, comments at this point? Oh, thanks, Jamie. Oh, cool.
For me, I'll just say thanks so much. This was, I'd taken a look at the Figma, so I had a general idea, but yeah, great progress you guys have made, and looking forward to following and hopefully getting involved in one manner or another.
Yeah,
Cool.
agreed. I have like 100 questions, but I don't want to be annoying, so I'll leave it to the Slack channel.
If there is room for like a follow-up call that's maybe
Yeah.
like optional just to collaborate and ask questions, I think that'd be appropriate. So like now you've kind of presented the information and now kind of a follow-up on like how people could participate or collaborate. I think that would be great.
I can take that on.
Yeah,
Just
Okay.
reach
yeah,
out
and I
to
think
folks and
if
organize
we were to wait like a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
then we should have all of the pieces kind of, you know, wired up, I guess. And yeah, we'll try and get, probably it'd be good to have Michael, Gareth, and maybe and Alex Benoit as well from Startin'blox, and then we kind of have all of the pieces, and then the questions that go over my head, there would be people
Yeah.
who can actually answer them.